Yes. Right.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Johanna, for introducing me. It's an immense pleasure to be here today to have heard from some very knowledgeable, talented, and erudite people. And I want to thank my doctoral supervisor, Professor Etkind, for having put this thing together and for having invited me and for having given me a chance to speak to all of you today. My name is Henri Kaup. I am a junior research fellow at the Estonian Academy of Security Sciences, as well as a PhD student at the UI in Florence. We have heard very compelling and convincing arguments today about how petrostates see decarbonization as a threat, which is to be opposed by any means necessary, including military means, with either aspiring decarbonizers or transit countries, what Professor Etkin has called petroaggression. This presentation will be looking at how such conflicts might counterintuitively also re-carbonize the few decarbonized parts of a petrostate. And there's no better example of that than Kaliningrad Oblast. So, Kaliningrad Oblast is a Russian enclave on the Baltic. And for this area, its strategic importance has been a defining feature throughout its recent history. Here I've brought a contrast between the role or the situation of East Prussia before World War I on the left and the current situation on the right. And East Prussia used to serve as a shield, for the lack of a better term, against the Russian Empire, for the German Empire, and later against the Soviet Union for the Weimar Republic and the Third Reich. Nowadays, Kaliningrad Oblast gives Russia an exit onto the Baltic proper, which is, as you can see, effectively a NATO sea by now. So it is of immense strategic importance. Now, an interesting fact about Kaliningrad Oblast is that it is probably the most colonized area of Europe. It has been colonized twice. First in the 1200s, or starting in the 1200s, the local population, who were relatives of latter-day Latvians and Lithuanians, were assimilated or displaced by Germans. And after World War II, the German population was expelled wholesale and replaced with colonists from Russia and Belarus. So it is very homogeneous, and it has almost no cultural identity aside from the Russian identity to speak of. It is extraordinarily militarized. This map, who can read Russian and has eaten their carrots, can sort of decipher what's written on the right. But this is a map from 2003, and this is a minuscule area. It is the size of the country of Montenegro, about 13,000 square kilometers, and has around 1 million people. But its standing army is at least 15,000 strong. And these units are sort of what were present in 2003. Since then, Russia has placed Iskander ballistic missiles, modern jet fighters, and other things into the oblast. Allow me a brief historical detour into the energy history of Kaliningrad, which will sort of lay a base for the discussion of Putin's geopolitics and LNG later. It was a very developed region in Germany before 1945. And as you can see, the Germans went on quite a construction spree regarding hydroelectric and thermal power stations. The most amazing fact, in my view, is that two of them, two of the hydroelectric stations and one thermal station is still in operation even today. Now, what happened during the Cold War is interesting because the oblast was autonomous. It used to get its coal for its thermal power plants from Silesia. Silesia used to be a part of Germany before World War II, and after World War II, it became a part of Poland. And hence, it wasn't a problem to continue delivering coal there. Afterwards, another shift was made onto Ukrainian coal, which was even easier because they were both parts of the Soviet Union. However, greater developments in energy infrastructure started to take place outside of the oblast as the Cold War developed. So, for instance, the large thermal plant in Lithuania, as well as the Ignalina nuclear power plant. And on the second slide, huge thermal power plants in Poland, and high voltage lines were put up. So effectively, Kaliningrad Oblast became dependent on what were considered, brotherly, either Soviet republics or socialist states. Now, that's good. Now, that dependence became untenable in the 1990s. Actually, not practically untenable, but it became politically complicated due to the fact that Russia's relationship, especially with Lithuania, was nothing to brag about already in the 90s. However, huge and tectonic shifts started happening under the Putin administration. Before that, I claim that Kaliningrad actually reached the zenith of its green energy use, because if you look at Ignalina, if you look at the two hydropower plants, which were actually shifted on again in the 1990s, then the proportion of green energy in its energy balance was considerable. However, the first Putin administration, and it can be debated why, but thought that it would be crucial to build a new thermal power plant in the oblast. And so they did. That is the Kaliningrad 2 thermal power plant built in 2005. They, or rather Putin during his second administration, had an idea of building a nuclear plant himself. That was due to the fact that, and one can criticize the European Union at this juncture, for Lithuania to become a member of the European Union, shutting down the Ignalina plant was a condition. And due to that fact, Putin thought that the Ignalina plant could just be duplicated in Kaliningrad Oblast. However, and the timeline is quite interesting here, that project was ended immediately after the Euromaidan and after the change in the Ukrainian government in early 2014. Instead, an unprecedented building spree in thermal power plants started. And you can see all of them, effectively 5 in 5 years, or 4 in 5 years, I'm sorry. But truly, with unprecedented speed, the Putin administration almost doubled the amount of energy generation capacity. Now, the problem with that is that there is no gas in Kaliningrad Oblast, and all of these power plants run on gas. They can also run on diesel, but gas is the preferred fuel. And the gas comes through Lithuania. Lithuania, being a NATO member and a quite bellicose one, is a hindrance to gas transfers to the Kaliningrad Oblast. And due to that fact, Russia has built a floating terminal in 2019 on the Kaliningrad coast with the wish to divert, or rather surpass the need to use the Lithuanian pipelines. The problem with that at the moment is that the Russian capacity to liquefy natural gas on the Baltic Sea is smaller than the ability of the floating terminal to receive it. Russia has big gas liquefaction facilities in the Arctic, the Jamal SPG, but getting from there to Kaliningrad Oblast is understandably complicated due to the fact that you have to pass by the Danish Strait and generally make a very long trip. Now, the way to solve that problem on Russia's part has been to construct a new LNG plant called the Baltijski SPG. But with that, the European Union sanctions after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 have been very successful. And nowadays, the completion of the plant, if it was to ever be completed, is fully contingent on the participation of Chinese companies, which are being courted very aggressively, but which haven't been very committal. So, to conclude, Kaliningrad Oblast, in my view, is an amazing case study in the way a region can re-carbonize due to perceived geopolitical threat. Again, this building spree, all of that after the Ukraine war, and all of that due to strategic considerations, namely the fact that an atomic plant would be, a target. It could pollute the whole area. So in an aggressive confrontation with the military bloc that is surrounding you, Putin opted for gas plants, effectively moving back onto perhaps the greenest of fossil fuels, but a fossil fuel nevertheless. So I believe that it is contingent on Western consent whether Russia can indeed move on to autonomous electricity production in the oblast, or it cannot. Because although the Baltic SPG project is currently moribund, you could say, the Yamal SPG is very much active and is actually delivering LNG to France, Belgium, and Spain as we speak. So it is effectively in the Europeans' hands whether to continue sort of enabling and beefing up the Russian LNG capacity or no. And in the case of choosing no, Russia will be forced to negotiate, at least with Lithuania, or it will have less leverage than it would have in the case of complete LNG autonomy. I believe that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henri. I suggest we do like the last session. We keep rolling with presentations. You write down your questions and we'll have them for the discussion afterwards.
So, yeah. How we change this?
Yes, sir. You have the.
I can also use here, yeah? It's possible. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having us in this project. My name is Bohdan, and I studied with at EUI with Alexander Etkind, and I did my work on cultural history. And Artem is also not an oil or gas historian, so we both come up from kind of a bit aside of the interest of this group. But I work at the Catholic University in my city and also at the Center for Urban History. So we propose to the project that we will research two cases. One case of the Urbicide, which is related to the city of Kharkiv, where Artem lives, and another case of my city, Lviv, which is on the opposite side of the country, which experiences the rapid growth and development during the war. And this case was interesting for the organizers. And so we don't have any findings to present, but rather we want to show you the structure of our research that will be made this year until the end of this year. And to start with, we need to emphasize that we are biased. This is my colleague who was shot down during the war. We used to work together, and all the works that we do for 2 years already is in various way related to the war. So I can't say that we are objective in a way. We are within the history that unfolds in our eyes, in front of our eyes, and it's not easy for us. But on the other side, we are observed. So I was giving many interviews to foreign media and also produced some, for instance, the book with my students, which we collected dreams and diaries of war. And we also observe. So on two sides. So we are kind of the object as people who live through the war. We are the objects of observation, and also we observe as well.
Okay, my name is Artem Kharchenko, and yes, it's my first time in Lviv after the beginning of war, full-scale war. And this presentation about our future text, I hope, and we try to make a description of several sections of this text. And the main idea in one section was provide a brief overview of our personal experience. And on one hand, okay, we both participated in recorded interviews, volunteered and took shifts in shelters. And on one hand, the wartime experience make researchers captivities on their own research field as they cannot live. And on the other hand, it demonstrated the effectiveness of horizontal connections and institutions that enable them to convert social capital and preserve resources, not only for survival, but also for continuing their work.
Okay, so we present several sections of what we're going to make. So the first section will be about our observations and us. And then the second section, we want to talk about the first phase of war. It's often omitted that it starts on 2014. And during this first phase of war, there were some already tendencies developed that will, extend further in the second phase, which will start in 2022. And for instance, in the case of my city, the Lviv city, there was obvious shift in the urban imagination from the city of services and tourism to the city of medicine, because there was a big influx of people coming from the front in 2014, 15, 16, and the city encountered several things, like, the influx of refugees for the first time, and then the growing cemetery
in my city, there is a specially developed procedure of burials, and anthropologists, they study how actually urban development, how urban administration reacts to these new realities. But then also there was awareness that the city needs to develop further in the direction of special services. And they would take the case of Israel and would reimagine themselves, I'm talking about city administration, as the place of medical services in this new context of the military conflict with Russian Federation. And in Kharkiv, there was a bit different situation.
Yes, and it's the title from the one popular Ukrainian sources, Ukrainska Pravda, Ukrainian Truth, the Year of Renaissance, and it's about the man who's sitting, Gennady Adolfovich Kernes. And
he's already dead.
Yes. He's passed away several years ago, but this first stage of war, before full-scale war, was continued with this person, and in my mind, he presented a special patterns, very it's a main characteristic for many big cities in eastern Ukraine, and he was popular as a major who created many parks. Kharkiv Disneyland on this picture, yeah, but it was from one hand, it was a period of stability and prosperity maybe for Kharkiv, because many people, many opinion makers described this time as a window of opportunity for Kharkiv, because Donetsk was failed, and Kharkiv gave many resources, intellectual, people resources, material resources, but maybe it's not effectively liberating the potential of the migration flow or successfully integrating displaced business from this time.
So the idea is that actually Kharkiv, as the one of the biggest cities in Ukraine, it had more than 1.5 million population, as the whole Kaliningrad Oblast, even more. And this was a heavily industrialized city. And that's why it had a very kind of vertical, I mean, the political system is the same in Lviv and in Kharkiv, but the organization of power is different because it relies on elites which effectively control production. Yes, so that's why it's called Renaissance, like Renaissance, yes, Renaissance. And because these people, they accumulate funds and power in one kind of vertical system, which is different in other cities. So it's not common for the whole country, but as Artem says, Kharkiv represents this way of post-communist elite organization on the urban level. So these people also are big owners of enterprises, and they also control urban administration. And that's why decisions are not made easily. Yes. So for instance, if you want to make new business in Lviv, it's easier than in Kharkiv, because Kharkiv has much harder control on the investments fields, let's say this way. Okay, let's move on. And then the third section of this research, which we're going to make with city administrations, lay people, IDPs, refugees, and also business owners who had to relocate, for instance, from Kharkiv to Lviv, will deal with the current war that started in 2022. And this changed a lot the situation. So Kharkiv was heavily hit by war. Every day there is something destroyed in Kharkiv. We obviously see a lot of the influx of migrants that, moved to Kharkiv in the first ways, now was moving to the west from Kharkiv. And my city was the big hub for population moving from Kharkiv, for instance, to Lviv. Lviv there are some images from the archive of the Center for Urban History, but basically Lviv became a hub, temporary hub for relocation of people. It doubled its population in several months, then it was kind of more stabilized. But what the Lviv in western part of Ukraine faced was the instant growth since 2022 of relocating businesses from the east and then the coming people. So, for instance, before the war, the population was around 800,000 people in Lviv. Now it estimated around 1 million. And then again, what we see that the number of industries are growing steadily. And you can't say that this is kind of, you know, the decline, the war decline. We rather see the war development for the city, while Kharkiv has a bit, I would say, drastically different situation.
Yes, but maybe with one remarks, it doesn't seem that self-government in Kharkiv lose control, and the next measure after Kernes, you see the Kharkiv railway station, main station, during the first months of war, and the center of city center of in Kharkiv, but all the elites keep control in the city and keep control on the different processes, and it's important for our next section.
Yeah, and here we come more to energy. So what we're going to do is interview city administrators and how they actually imagine their cities in the context of the energetic war on energy. Yes, so in 2022 and especially in 2023, Russian military started to destroy Ukrainian energy system. Systematically, we had big blackouts in 2023. The huge power plant near Kharkiv was completely destroyed. The huge energy system near my city was destroyed completely. And Ukraine, from the country which was exported energy, turned into the country which has shortages of energy. So every day in my city now we have from 3 to 6 hours blackouts. Then in Kharkiv it may take like 10 hours. And there is a big issue with energy, though what we observe on the level of urban administration, there is no discourse which in regards to an energy maintenance. So it's a kind of the overall idea is that this is the state which runs the system, the same as with like anti-missile protection systems. They would say that municipalities are not allowed to buy any, weapons on the market. So this is the state that is involved in these issues, and the cities are left by themselves without protection and without any possibilities to defend themselves. And city administrations, they are rather short in understanding what they should do. Like what there is no discourse, there is no idea how we can deal with energies for the future. And if it opened up something that we didn't want. Yeah, okay. So these are the energy systems that how they look now. The enemy attacks whatever energy infrastructure is available to be attacked. And in my city, in Lviv, which is not the industrial node, it was a city of small entrepreneurs mainly. The answer was rather quick and decentralized. So people bought the huge numbers of generators, and every second business, every second shop has its own generator. I think we were the highest demand country in 2023 on generators in the world. We bought almost everything that was in Europe available, in China also. So it's like every friend I have has a generator at home, and if you walked in 2023 through the cities, they were making noise and a lot of pollution, but then still you could make the energy for the small enterprises, while in Kharkiv it's not that easy because Kharkiv has huge enterprises and much more difficult infrastructure.
Yeah, and for me, the situation in Kharkiv is an evidence that our self-government or our central government, central authority bodies don't have ideas about new approach in this issue, because we have only such temporary ideas. On picture, you can see the gift from Kazakhstan, but it's very popular ideas in Ukraine during the first winter blackout 2022-2023 about such places with charge for your phone or your computer, or place for tea or coffee for citizens, but not ideas in this time, during this time, with this window of opportunity to new approach, new ideas. Our major, for example, or our Ministry of Energy, when they talked about power station, they talked about renovation, but not something new.
Yeah, basically what we see, they don't have any vision for possible renewal of the energy, whatever, grid infrastructure. Because these stations that were destroyed, honestly saying, were horrible. Soviet stations polluting really environment heavily. Kakhovka's hydroelectric stations destruction, demolition actually. By some ecologists is seen as a good thing, but of course for the energy system is not a good thing. So we have a kind of these various perspectives of lay people would say that's good that they don't work anymore, but then we need electricity. And in this image you see the traditional Kazakh yurta, which is used by nomads. And you know, Kazakhstan is one of the players in the energy system, but then they offer these yurtas to Ukrainian cities, and often on urban level they would call these places as centers of unbrokenness, центры незламности, which is strange a bit for you to hear, but then there is the whole myth, and it's mainly dedicated to cities like Kharkiv, that it's impossible to break us. Yes, so it's kind of we unbroken. And one of the hospitals that developed in my city has this title, Unbroken, where people receive various forms of protheses after they lose their hands or legs and everything. And the myths now develop. In this phase, we have a big development of new imaginary, which is again not related to energy. This is the recent blown on Kharkiv. The huge shop was destroyed over the day, killing plenty of people. But then still the metaphor which is used by politicians, and mainly by politicians, refers to this another famous Soviet building made out of concrete, that we are the city of concrete, stainless, not stainless, how do we say it? Steel and concrete. So we are kind of unbroken, which is the myth, and many locals, they stand against this myth.
Okay, and it's very popular idea in Ukrainian discourse about fortress city, Kharkiv Fortezia, or city of steel, Kharkiv is Zalizobeton. But it's not so interesting for local people, and I heard many complaints from Kharkiv activists and Kharkiv opinion makers about this way to construct from a big city with ideas about science, about student city, about city of universities, to create a strong city, but without ideas for perspective, for future.
Yes, what we want to emphasize that we see on both levels, in Lviv, in the very western part of Ukraine, and Kharkiv, in the very northeast of Ukraine, the same pattern that cities, we mainly mean urban administration, they really stuck in the imaginary. They can't really develop the imaginary. The imaginary mainly leads to the reflections on war, and they don't reflect also on energy and what is the possibilities the war gives to them. The same is with Lviv. This is the formal insignia. It's a kind of symbol for the city, which use the historic towers which were developed by various Christian communities, but then there is no place for the medicine here. So it's like in this imagination, in the past, they referred to the past, selling the past to tourists, yes? And now they need to sell something else, something different. And this difference is not really obvious, clear for both sides. And when it comes to, we are already finishing. So when it comes to some research that we base also our ideas, of course, we follow these ideas of urbicide, but then urbicide can be, it's connected to genocide, of course, but then urbicide can have various forms, like this book, Cities Under Siege, or Urbicide by Martin Kovar. They cover different urbicide. So there is this political dimension of urbicide, when there is a green ideology or whatever, the political ideology or economy can influence the urban development, yes, and then it can kill the city, and then it's called urbicide. And on the other side, there is this military urbicide, which means like the case of Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina, when the city was intendedly killed by the fighting forces, like in Syria. Yes, cities were completely destroyed. And the idea of urbicide is often cited in many articles, like the logic of urbicidal terrorism. You see this article from 2017 already. And then Ukrainian scholars, they publish actually in Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, Czech, Slovak magazines, in Polish magazines, not in very Western magazines. Proszę? Okay, yeah, we have done. So, yeah, these articles already appear, and you see this urbicide clearly here. Destruction, preservation, rethinking of urban cultural heritage, and so on. But then there is no reflection on the development, because in the case of my city, we see a bit different situation, yes? And in our case, we want to compare, because we see the lack of studies which would, take bigger picture and see how the destruction of one place brings the development of the other place. Of course, there are no casual, and even statistical correlations between these two kind of destruction and development, but we see them in the context of the war. And these ideas that urbicide and the Russian-Ukrainian war should be also added to the urbicide. Yes, so we are done. Thank you, and sorry for taking your time.
Yes, sure. Okay, thank you so much. I will start this presentation by saying that this is a case study from Africa. Everything we've been hearing since the beginning of this workshop has been Europe, Russia, and so on. My name is Ayansina Ayanladde, but just call me Shina, the one I underlined there, because I know I have very long name. In terms of experience, Nigeria, US, Norway, here, even Australia, UK, I had different experiences in terms of academic and in terms of working in International Research Institute. And I'm happy to also join Alex as a postdoc here. So the presentation today, I want to prepare your mind that is actually, should I say, concept presentation towards what my postdoctoral activities in this research group is all about. So it's not actually a final result. So, but what I've done so far since I joined the group, we're trying to present the historical relationship between the dictatorship and oil industry in Nigeria using the case study of Nigeria, and also the relationship between the GDP, oil exploitation, and non-oil crude oil exploitation in Nigeria. What is the implication of that, as Nigeria is one of the petro states in Africa? I will not go much deeper into what is the definition of petrostate. We've given a series of definition even from the first section of our workshop today. But if you mind, you can see different the definition we have there, which is actually popularly known. But the key point there is that before you can say a state or country is a petrostate, the certain percentage of their income or GDP actually depend on petroleum or crude oil exploration, which Nigeria is one of them. But the question now is, where is Nigeria? I'm sorry to bring you to geography. You know, Nigeria is in West Africa, as you can see down there. They usually name it as the biggest in terms of population. Sometimes some people categorize Nigeria as in terms of landmarks, but basically in terms of population, is the largest in West Africa. And in terms of the oil history, a lot of things have happened in the past, from the period of colonial era up to the period when we started mining crude oil in 1906 and 1914, when it actually started fully in Nigeria. And these have actually brought dramatic situation into economic and the development in the country for the past decade. But the scenario here is that since the oil exploration started in the country has fully depend on crude oil in terms of the means of income in terms of the GDP. And when you look at all the companies all over the world, don't let me pinpoint anyone, talk of Shell, talk of any other one, Mobis that are mining oil in Nigeria, one way or the other, drastically the whole country move away from traditional means of getting revenue income for the nation towards oil, which is a little bit pathetic, with which you will see in all the slide I'm going to present here. But one thing is that colonial administrator and oil workers or oil country used the whole idea to bring different oil company into the country, exploring the whole country, especially in the Niger region, which I will show you later on. Anyhow, just get oil. No matter what happened to the people or to the ecology in that area, it doesn't matter. But we'll get into that. Well, there's nothing we can do about that. I listened to somebody talking about oil capitalism this morning. People want to make money anyhow. So, and the country too wants to develop. And the only resources we have to make development happen is actually through crude oil. But still, I want to say that this brief historical background I just gave you is not actually into details. There are still more things that is now actually happening in the whole country. Currently, the country has developed its own, for the very first time, indigenous refinery owned by one popular man called Dangote in collaboration with the government and other key people. Though we are talking actually for this workshop and in global circle about the decarbonization, but still, I will still say that reluctantness is still there, especially for Nigeria and some other global south country in terms of what needs to be done. We want to develop the country and you also want to embrace decarbonization. How can you marry the two together? So next, I need more data to be able to complete my story in terms of the history and what is on ground for now. But when we look at the oil field in Nigeria, the oil field in Nigeria are actually located in the Niger Delta, where you have the red square in the map of West Africa. And you can see that in detail in the map of Nigeria. The whole delta is actually mainly where we have oil exploration in large quantity. But now there are some pockets of locations even within the country where they are still mining oil. For example, we have one in Lagos. Lagos is not actually in Niger Delta, and also some other location where they find it in the north, especially close to Chad. And when you look at this map generally, in total, there are so many oil well where they are mining oil in the Niger Delta. We have not less than 606 oil field in the Niger Delta alone area, and about 355 and onshore, while the remaining 251 are offshore. A lot of activities are going on there in terms of oil exploration. But the implication of this, we are going to see that later on the economy and also as a petrostate and also on other human activities. The oil export from Nigeria actually, you can see the top 10 to US, even to far to China, South Africa, and Europe here too, and many other locations where Nigeria export oil. And the relationship between the GDP, oil export and non-oil is actually obvious, which I'm going to present some figures to you to just arouse your mind. Oil and non-oil export play essential role in the economic activity of Nigeria, because initially before the discovery of crude oil, Nigeria depend on natural resources, or let me say rain-fed agriculture. But now oil is there, the whole thing just moved down gradually. And the nature of oil export is that one way or the other, it diminishing the enthusiasm or political will to support non-oil commodity in the country. When you look at this chart, for example, the first one is the crude oil export, and the other side is non-crude oil export in terms of the annual and also in terms of the quarterly income that comes from there. And you will see that the one from the oil export is actually so much, far above 15 million. And when you look at that of non-oil, it's about just 7, which is quite small. What is the implication of that? The implication of that, when you bring the two together in the same chart, is that you will just see the difference between oil export and the non-oil export. You can see that the green one, that's where you see the number of the in terms of the oil exportation in annual. And also when you look at non-export, you will just see that it's very, very low compared to the oil revenue coming from oil exploitation. So the Nigerian economy actually depend on oil exploitation, and non-oil sector competitively has reduced gradually because the whole country based its own economy on oil, which is a little bit pathetic. And here too, when you look at these statistics, the statistics being presented here is from National Bureau of Statistics. You can also discover that from non-oil exportation is very, very minute. When you look at the small one below there from 2015 up to 2018, compared to what we have in terms of the total export for crude oil, and bring the two together in order to zoom in properly what happened in the recent year from 2014 up to now. We can also see that crude oil actually, in terms of the percentage of the exportation, has much percentage, sometimes even almost 100% of the whole export activities for the country. But when you compare it to non-crude oil, it's very, very minute. So it suggests that Nigerian economy grow negatively impact, but positive impact to DNDP in terms of the revenue from oil exports. But the negative impact of that is that then the whole country now become much more rely on oil exportation rather than all other means of revenue. Actually, the will to promote non-oil exportation reduce gradually. And for example, the case study, when you look at the case of agriculture, which was actually the main source of revenue before. Now currently agricultural in terms of production and exportation is now going down gradually, which is not actually good enough. But now why all these statistics? When we are talking about decarbonization, the main thing that I actually conclude from this little statistic we are able to get from National Bureau of Statistics is that much more depend on oil exploitation is not actually good for the country, because in the nearest future, either we like it or not, we usually say it in the country that oil is going to finish one day. And when it's finished, we need to go back to agriculture. And why agriculture is very important these days, there are so many, big land to cultivate and to engage in agricultural activities that are actually abandoned in order to focus on oil exploration, and which is not quite good. Now, now we are talking about the era of electric cars. Who is going to buy Nigerian oil like all other oil dependent country? Who is going to buy the oil in the next 10, 20 years? We need to, Nigeria needs to think towards that. And that's the whole essence of this case study. But I will not finish this presentation without opening your mind to a lot of activities and the impact that this oil exploitation have actually done in the Niger region in terms of oil spillage, which is actually, this is actually from part of the, my PhD, just improved the data. When you compare 2021 even to 2024 in terms of oil spillage, there are a series of oil spillage that has happened within this period of time, and it is actually affecting the whole ecological system in the Niger Delta. And a lot of researchers have reported the impact in terms of social impact, in terms of even financial impact and ecological impact, even including the health impact of oil exploration. And from Niger, they also show the impact on agricultural activities. Majority of land that happens to be crop land, cocoa, where people usually get cocoa to farm They could not farm there again because the whole area is covered by oil. And the other ecological component being affected are the marine mammals, animals, which are also being affected and being dead. And the implication of that is not only in terms of looking at the ecological, in terms of plants and animal alone, but the feedback impact too comes to mind. In agricultural environment, if people cannot farm, the implication is that you will not be able to get good food to eat, and you cannot be importing every cash crop or any crop from neighboring country. Or in terms of animal from water, like fish that people depend upon, source of protein is also affecting people there. So whatsoever happened to the ecological system comes back to human, and that is what is actually happening in the Niger Delta. The whole thing is that, like I told you, this is just the beginning of my postdoc. I'm looking forward to be able to do more from here. Thank you very much.
You don't have, so I'm going to just back to the background. Yeah.
So finally, the last paper. I don't have a PowerPoint, and I decided, after listening to the first panel in particular, to not give the prepared paper on whose title you see in the panel, but instead to reflect on what I heard and learnt today in relation to issues of international criminal law, which I've been thinking about lately because I work on genocide. But I also edit a journal on genocide research, and a few years ago we did a special issue on ecocide and related issues to the environment. And I thought we could start a conversation about relating these bigger issues that Sasha outlined in his paper and which has been published on the CEU website, and these issues of criminality, because they also pertain to what was discussed in the second panel about, what do we do? And to what extent can the law be useful? But before we get there, I'd like to also address some of the issues that came up more generally, which are not necessarily legal ones, in the first panel. So Sasha highlighted the noxious effect of petrostates and in various modalities. And we heard a paper just now, which took us outside Europe, which is good. Finally got outside East Central Europe. I understand the focus for that here, but still, there are petrostates and the effects in many other parts of the world. And it's important we relate them, because that's the second paper that we heard from Dr. Mukoyama. We learned that why do petrostates exist at all? Sort of a fundamental question of the international system. And what I understood from the paper, the second paper, was that whereas they were once part of colonial spaces or protectorates, but they, some emerged as independent states and others were merged into other nation states. And the conditions for one or the other depended on whether the elites in the protectorate were willing to collaborate with the former colonial power. In that case, they were allowed to have independence, right? So that raises the issue of the links between petrostates and their partners. And if that's the case, then does it make sense to focus on petrostates as the destructive independent variable in an otherwise healthy, or at least non-criminal political economic system as the source of all evil? Or do we need to look at the system more generally? I mean, when I think of the liberal Western partners of these petrostates, like the US, like Australia, Canada, which are not just consumers, but also emitters. But in my case, Australia is a massive carbon state with coal. And the coal lobby has its tentacles deep in the political system because the Australian economy and the standard of living is really dependent on it, as it is in Canada. And yet these are liberal states, comparatively speaking, if not from the perspective of the indigenous people who were robbed of their land during the settler colonial conquest. It raises two questions. These liberal institutions, in which the petrostates don't enjoy, they're illiberal, but the liberal institutions are dependent, if we take the premise of the second paper, dependent on the cheap resources of the petrostates, and the price for the liberalism within the state is paid beyond its borders. So the liberal inside is premised on the illiberal outside. This is not a new insight. Schmidt and many others have talked about this for years, but I think we can integrate that into this discussion of petrostates. And if we start thinking of an integrated system where the insides and the outsides are connected, I'm reminded of the book, The Genocide Machine, from 1973, it's over 50 years ago, by Canadian scholars Robert Davis and Mark Zanis, who were talking about the pacification, the conquest of the Canadian North in the settler colonial expansion of white settlement, which entailed also seizing the resources of forestry, fishing, and ultimately fossil fuels, which are so elemental to the Canadian economy. And the notion of a machine suggests an integrated mechanism which is self-propelling. And I think you talked about, Sasha, in your paper in the second half about, capitalism more generally, which the petrostates are just one necessary cog. Now, bringing this back to the law, none of this was illegal at the time, and certainly not the environmental catastrophes which this expansion of capitalism and colonialism in the 19th century entailed. Now let's skip ahead century to the Rome Statute 1998, which has one ecocidal clause. It's Article 82b4, which criminalizes intentionally launching an attack in the knowledge that such an attack will cause incidental loss of life or injury to civilians, or damage to civilian objects, or widespread and severe damage to the natural environment, which would be clearly excessive in relation to the concrete and direct overall military advantage anticipated. I'm surprised, given this clause, that it's not been invoked by the ICC prosecutor in Ukraine or in Gaza, where people are now starting to accumulate evidence about the destruction of the agriculture in agricultural assets in Gaza, where the clear intention is to prevent the reproduction of human life in Gaza, at least by Palestinians, so they leave. And so you need the eco side to prevent human life. So they're related, obviously. Now, there is a legal debate about instituting or including ecocide in the Rome Statute. It hasn't happened yet, apart from this clause. However, the problem is that this clause is related to armed conflict, and only international armed conflict, not to civil wars. Okay? It doesn't include environmental damage, say, of the same scale in peacetime. So there's huge gaps in international criminal law. Now, of course, when you get to the Rome Statute, these are meant to refer to the gravest crimes. So less grave crimes are supposed to be dealt with by other legal institutions and, say, domestic ones, which is what the second panel was talking about and some of the third panel. Okay. But we know that states have their vested interests in these states militate against these kind of reforms. So to combat that, international lawyers have drafted, there's been, say, an ongoing draft code of offenses against peace and security of mankind that's been going on for decades. And from the 80s until the 90s, there was a debate about including ecocide in the list of crimes against peace and security. And there was a draft Article 26, which provided the criminalization of conduct, quote, of an individual, so of individuals, not governments, right, who willfully cause or order the causing of widespread, long-term and severe damage to the natural environment. And that corresponded to another article on state responsibility, which was about willful and severe damage to the environment. And this was generally meant not just for armed conflict, but in peacetime as well. And sure enough, America, I think the Netherlands, and Australia and Canada, so the large carbon states, in terms of coal, opposed this because they're also developmental states. And this draft article was removed and was never put on the table. We can see this from the drafting histories if you keep the records of these things. So at the moment, there's just a proposal by an independent expert committee to include ecocide in the Rome Statute, but it hasn't gone anywhere, and these things take decades. So, like the Genocide Convention and many other international legal provisions, the likelihood is that any article like this draft Article 26, which could be interpreted as criminalizing development projects, because development projects can, will impact on the environment in these severe ways, will never see the light of day. These international conventions are always boiled down to lowest common denominator statements that everybody can agree on. So they're very weak in the end, and all have all kinds of loopholes and so forth. So whether we can expect much from international criminal law is difficult to see. I don't know where this leaves the theory of petrostates and so forth. That's something Sasha and I are going to discuss. But I wanted to put on the table that there's, this is somehow going to intersect with an international legal discussion, and also then with a critical environmental studies field, which you all know about, which is more interested in the system as a whole as metaphorically criminal, rather than individual states, which then exculpate other states. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thanks. I can say else you want. Okay. No, I don't mind. No.
Thank you so much for already doing the work of wrapping up, opening questions. I don't have a job yet. Thank you so much. If you want to...
I can go and sit over there. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. If anyone from the audience has any question, or people from the panel want to ask questions to each other, the floor is yours.
Dirk, thank you very much for this, for opening our eyes to this sphere of international criminal law, which we didn't cover and didn't touch, but it's potentially, of course, relevant, highly relevant for our discussion, because a part of our discussion was very empirical, and another part was rather utopian, and this. Addressing the international criminal law as a matter of hope, or like as a potential instrument for resolving some of these issues, like ecocide or emissions control, of course is a utopian fantasy right now. But I believe that who else would be doing this other than people like us, intellectuals, and first it was always intellectuals, then it was legislators, and that was how usually with the international communities, but the matter of these issues are international, and that squares the problem, how to reach a consensus with that. So based on your experience, like, is there any hope, even is there any utopian hope that the current international institutions would take this responsibility and would legislate something relevant for our concerns, such as ecocide or emissions control? Would say the United Nations would be such an institution that would develop new international order, new laws and rules and practices? Or it's like impossible, there should be some kind of alternative institutional design. And Dirk, what is your personal utopia?
You asking me that now? Or, okay, we'll open up later. So, I mean, the Rome Statute is not a UN governed institution. It's an intergovernmental. I mean, it's a treaty, international treaty that people can sign on to or not, unlike the International Court of Justice, which is embedded in the UN system. So, we know states have not signed on. Russia, Russia, Israel, America have not signed the ICC. And the only reason there can be a viable ICC warrant for Israeli leaders now is because Palestine is a member and the alleged crimes took place on Palestinian territory. Okay? I mean, all these like technical legalities. The thing is, these convention negotiations usually take decades to unfold. They did, for example, the additional protocols of the Geneva Convention from 1977, had 10 or 15 years of, throat-clearing preliminary meetings, if not longer. Okay. And so although they're signed in 1977, their spirit is very much the spirit of, anti-colonial struggle from the 50s and the 60s. There's these massive time lags, right? And even then, the Americans didn't sign them, or the Israelis. But they have normative, normative force, even if you've not signed them. People think that's customary international law now. And that could, that's going to be the story, I think, with environmental protection. I mean, one thing is emission control. That's not a criminal matter, right? That these are international agreements which set targets but can't even be enforced. International criminal law can't really be enforced either unless there's a Security Council resolution to put coercive force into these things. Like Israel will just ignore these warrants as Russia ignores the warrant on Putin, right? But it does mean that those people can't travel to countries which are parties to the Rome Statute. Now, then there's also the issue of just normative force. For example, there's no legal status to the concept of cultural genocide, because that was stripped from the Genocide Convention draft in 1947 and 48. It was there originally, and then was stripped out as the lowest common denominator definition of genocide was agreed on. But it's still a concept that people use, and it was used in Canada during the Royal Commission on taking the boarding schools. They decided to use cultural genocide because it didn't have legal force and wouldn't demand reparations, and although they are being paid. But the Justice Sinclair is a very famous, impressive First Nations jurist. He understood the government would not tolerate that. Right? I mean, they all speak in the corridors of power, about what's going to be in this report, but they would tolerate cultural genocide. But that's still a stigma for the Canadian government, and they paid out as a result. No state will want to be accused of ecocide, but it will take decades for it to sort of percolate up into international society beyond the communities like ours and the international lawyers who deal with this, and to become widespread and normative. In the same way, well, genocide's a different story because it exploded onto the scene. It was written in a book in 1944. 4 years later, it's international law. Okay? But the end of a massive world war is unprecedented. Rupture in the international system, and it's maybe when there's an environmental collapse, at least parts of the world. For example, I was chatting with Sergey earlier, when all the rivers of Europe dry up, as we've seen happening slowly, and agriculture collapses, and maybe then people, maybe then Europeans will think, maybe there is such a thing as ecocide, if it affects them, So I'm with you in the utopian effects, the utopian energy, and there actually is quite a lot of literature now, even in the press, on ecocide. I think there's many articles in the Guardian now. They come and go depending on what's happening in these international negotiations. I mean, right now, what's before at the UN is a draft convention on crimes against humanity. That's occupying that space. I have not seen a copy of it, and it would be good to know if there's anything on the environment in there. Okay, so before we continue our discussions, I'll find out, because I know people who are involved in it.
Thank you. Thank you. This was fascinating. I want to pick up the thread and bring the discussion that you raised on herbicide in it. I think, and this is probably more of a comment, that it's interesting to look at the history and genealogy of these things and terms and of warfare in general to understand maybe the overlaps between ecocide and genocide, or even of warfare and the environmental destruction that we're witnessing. Because there are these social theorists that I think Virilio was the first who said that at least since the Second World War that warfare became ecological. It was targeted less and less on it immediately on the body of the soldier, but more generally on its environment. There's a similar argument by Peter Sloterdijk for chemical warfare that is also targeting the environment, the atmospheric environment, the air we breathe, and these authors make a certain lineage to ecological problems, and what we are seeing as ecocide, as herbicide, or what we're discussing at that, or domicide in the context of Gaza is a concept that came up again, and also the examples of the destruction of agriculture, and you can also is of course also a war against the environment in a way. And I think also you can go back to the colonization and like something like killing of buffalo in the US is also part of an ecocide that translates into genocide. So I think it's important to keep these genealogical threads together, and to make it into a question, it would be a question that just addresses Dirk, because I would wonder how these environmental aspects in more general is reflected in legislation, international legislation on genocide or whatever. And the other question is, you mentioned the normative force. What are other mechanisms that this law can have? Because that is what part of the story that I want to tell is that much of the damage is bound to happen in the future. So it's not enough to make someone like we think of after war crimes, make someone pay reparations and then it's settled. It has to be reparation as a continuing payment, and how is something like that like imaginable, or is it not, and what are the limits of these legislation?
Yeah. I thought that was someone else, but
you had some legal situation.
Regulation, but I completely agree. The war is directed to the future to destroy your environment. So ecocide comes together with urbicide in the war that is now happening in Europe, and it should be regulated. I would say that, it should be put. I mean, what we see in Palestine is also the kind of urbicide case. So we use this term more like following other examples, like, and these examples, they follow genocide example. And it happened that Lemkin and Lauterbach were from the territories which are now under siege again. From my region, basically, Lemkin was working at the university in my city, and he was really exposed to these ideas of, killing one group by another group. But then again, he was directed to humans. I completely agree with you that we need to extend this to animals, to land, to cities, to cultural environment. But maybe Dirk can say more on this.
Yeah, Lemkin had a very holistic notion of what genocide represented when he wrote Axis Rule in Occupied Europe, based on the Nazi experience of what he would have thought, called colonial occupations, which were highly extractive, cutting down forests, otherwise extracting wealth from the environment to fund the German war effort at the expense of occupied peoples rather than Germans, obviously. So their living standards were remained. It was, it's just in a totalitarian military context. But also the reason it was called Access Rule under, occupied Europe and Access Rule is because he was also referring to the German Allied powers, right? But when he wrote the book, and wrote about how he wrote that book recently, he studied carefully the texts which were produced by the Czechoslovak and Polish governments in exile, which were in London. And they produced black books, white books, and so forth, which were catalogues of crimes by the German state on their territory and against their nationals. And of course, it was highly nationalistic. And this is the sort of the dark side of this holistic concept. So, the Poles would talk about, the Polish spirit as being attacked, the spirit of the Polish nation, which isn't really language we would use today. But if you sort of put that to one side, they very systematically catalogued the attacks on Polish or Czechoslovak nationhood in a material way. So they, if you look at the table of contents, which Lemkin then more or less copied, there were attacks on, the churches. Then there'd be a chapter, attacks on our Jewish citizens, right? Czechoslovak Jews or Polish Jews. And then the extraction of wood from the forests, in a very, clearly unecological way, because they weren't looking to renew this. It was plunder. Basically, they were plundering our nation. But the environment featured in there, but as the property of the nation in that framing, right? But this holistic approach to genocide as an attack on a society as a whole, and all that society required to reproduce itself, was extremely useful, even if it was couched in this very nationalistic language, which I find somewhat alien now, right? I don't believe in national spirits. There's no spirit in Australia, I can tell you. We're not an ancient civilization like the Poles, with literature that goes back hundreds of years, other than the indigenous people, obviously. In any event, but all that was stripped out. And this is what I meant by the lowest common denominator, was stripped out during the genocide negotiations at the United Nations. And, cultural genocide was gone, and political groups were stripped out. And you were left with basically mass killing and conditions causing mass death, okay, to make it
in a way, look like what people thought the Holocaust was. So you have this extremely high threshold now for what qualifies as genocide, when in Lemkin's original formulation, it would have included herbicide. It would have included what people are now calling scholasticide in Gaza, where all the universities are wiped out. So all these different sides, and we could maybe say ecocide, right, were included in the original definition of genocide, then stripped out. And so they've now taken on lives of their own. Also, the attacks on heritage, for example. There's now, I think there's a UN convention from the early 50s, which is often included in herbicide, I think. And in crimes against humanity from Nuremberg includes a lot of the acts which would be genocidal. So in a way, we're trying to revive and update Lemkin's vision. And I think that in a way we can see how they all fit together. But rather than fixating on the spirit of the nation, that actually, frankly, 19th century world that he inhabited, especially a small nations mentality from East Central Europe, where, the mentality is that, our nation could be wiped off the map because of the Russians or the Germans at any point. We place that with one that's not anthropocentric, or that understands that human life as such is dependent on the environment. So I think that would be a worthy project, yeah.
And maybe one remark, maybe you know that its idea about genocide, it's very understandable for Ukrainian society, because in our memory of policy, the plot about genocide, about Holodomor, Great Famine, the central plot of our memory policy since the Orange Revolution and presidency of Viktor Yushchenko. And in the beginning of war, after Bucha, for Ukrainian society was very important to describe the situation as genocide again, Russian genocide against Ukrainian. It seems as permanent plot of history, but as historian, I'm always try to avoid this law issue, and as person who knows a little bit about genocide studies, I can make references to the authors who writes about herbicide, for example. But for me, more important to show the discourse of city community about situation. And in Kharkiv today, among intellectual circles, it's a very popular idea not choose less broader context as genocide in general, but to talk about more specific situation as herbicide or ecocide, for example. Thank you.
One of these small Central European nations who have this irrational fear of being accidentally wiped out by Russians or Germans or larger nations. And I think that this is that's why I'm a little bit, I'm speaking not as a researcher, research energy, but speaking a little bit how somebody coming from this culture, that first of all, genocide concept is very inflammatory. The government of Belarus now introduced the laws on genocide and spends a lot of its energy to come back 80 years ago and to prove how not only Germany, but the whole Western civilization was trying to wipe out specifically the whole Western. Yeah, the West came there. Why? Well, because Germans have Austrians in their army, and they have Czechs, and they had Hungarians, and everyone else came there with specific purpose to wipe Belarus. And of course, they connect not only to national spirits, but to traditional values. And look, you look further east, the West is doing exactly like this now to Russia by, yeah. So, and that is like, I think that, I don't know, in this context, when all of these like awful regimes try to broaden the concept of genocide and, and just sort of connect to its inflammatory and triggering nature, like kind of weaponize it, like whether we as scholars should try to move in the opposite direction, more like what Artem suggested, to kind of narrow it and be careful with just expanding this term too much.
All right. So yeah, Dirk was playing with sites. I will add the new, not new, but energo site. This is what Russia does in Ukraine, because they are launching missiles and they are destructing and they are damaging critical energy infrastructure in Ukraine. There is no any military needed sense to do this in order to win the war. But they press and they are pressing, civilian infrastructure, energy sites. This is an energo site. But the most important thing that all these sites are just tactical mechanisms in the strategical genocide policy which authoritarian regimes are performing. And there is another thing which differs, approaches in democratic societies and in totalitarian societies. It's much more easier for the totalitarian ruler to cut the gas inside and outside to wage his or her whatever egoistic political or economic interests. It's not that easy to cut the gas in Europe, in democracies, because it's much more diversified. It's very human-oriented approach and policy. We have this Soviet movie, Diamond Hand, Бриллиантовая рука, where we remember this famous phrase, if they will not be buying our lottery tickets, we'll cut the gas. That's what the manager of the apartment building, because it's very easy to do when there is no any competition, where there is no any alternative. Yeah, and this is the big deal. That's what Ukraine as a state needs also to learn better how European societies and how European systems are working, in order to protect people's interests as much as possible. Because energy, electricity, whatever, this is definitely one of the most important needs nowadays, because everything is connected via internet. You can't live without electricity. That's why what we have in Ukraine, all these generators, this is not less important than food. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I have two questions for Ayansina and one comment for Dirk. For Ayansina, so I really enjoyed your presentation about Nigeria, and I don't know much about Nigeria, but I've been looking at the history of oil production in different parts of the world, and your point about oil exploration in the colonial period particularly interested me. So if my understanding is not wrong, the commercial level discovery in Nigeria happened sort of a bit later than the colonial period. I mean, closer to the decolonization period, right? So I wonder what kind of impact colonial oil production or oil exploration had on colonial politics. Like, was there any impact of oil on politics during the colonial period? That's the first question. And the second question is, I think you showed countries that import oil from Nigeria, and if I'm not wrong, I think India was the biggest importer of Nigerian oil. I wonder what kind of relationship the two countries have, and why India particularly imports a lot of oil from Nigeria. That's the second question. So, and for Dirk, I found your point about petrostates and partners, their partners. I found it quite convincing. I think I totally agree that we should think about petrostates not independently, but within the network they are part of, with countries importing their oil, because producing oil is not important politically. Exporting oil is important, and I think I also think that, as you suggested, I think peace and prosperity in liberal states have been quite based on cheap oil from these illiberal petrostates. I think we've been sort of outsourcing the cost of their peace and our peace and prosperity to those living in the petrostates. Sometimes when there is some suggestion from international organizations or governments in the West, saying petrostates need good governance to have a better situation in these countries. But when I hear those sort of arguments, I feel like, give me a break. Who made global governance, good governance, a luxury in petrostates? And I think the legacies of the colonial partnership are still definitely there. But thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Nice questions. Let me start from the first one. In terms of colonial period implication on the oil exploration and the whole country generally, I will make you to understand that Nigeria got independent in 1960. The implication is that oil exploration has already started before the independence. And actually before then, after then too, they still believe that colonial masters were not actually totally left the country. They left in paper, but the companies and their infrastructures are still there, which they still want to monitor. And part of the infrastructure and companies are actually in the Niger Delta region where they mine oil. Apart from other natural resources, they mine in other parts of the country. The implication of that is actually huge in terms of political implication, because in the long run, from other parts of European country and the British colonial masters too, there was a series of negotiations that nearly divided the country into two when we experienced civil war in the country, which was so brutal. And when you look at the history of that quite critically, this is actually attached to the oil exploration. Who wants to own what in the Niger Delta? Is if Shell, which is from one country, or from other oil company, which is from another country, the country from developed Western world. And I will put it this way, that political situation of that is still ongoing. I'm sorry to say that, in the sense that even here currently in Niger Delta, we have so many of these companies too that are not actually indigenous, but from the capital state. What I mean by developed countries, mining there. And they have series of influences on the political decisions, even in the country. Sometimes if you do the election, before you can get in there, you should be able to get support from some of these bigger power oil companies. So, and it's complicated, but gradually now we are talking about decarbonization. Nigeria too in terms of government are now rethinking that one day oil is going to finish, we need to go back to agriculture, fine. But still we need development within the short period of time that we have that we can also make the refinery work. What can be done to help development? That's another issue, which during the COP28 in Dubai, I was there, and Nigeria also has government, has large number of representatives there. The OSS is just to synthesize that, look, we believe in decarbonization, but still the countries need to develop. So in terms of the colonization and impact on Nigeria oil, crude oil, is a little bit complicated. I will still say that though we got the freedom in terms of independence, but still one way or the other in terms of economy, oil exploration, superpower are still managing it. Though Shell is trying gradually to move out, not totally, but to give part of its company to indigenous one, now that we have a refinery, but still it's still complicated, to be honest with you. The second question in terms of why India, I asked the same question too. I think the whole story started when one way or the other, US decided not to be buying much of the oil from Nigeria. Initially, at the beginning, majority of the exportation usually go to United States or US and some other European country. But when the plan came, because they could make treaty with Saudi Arabia and some other bigger countries in OPEC, so Nigeria has to look for alternative. And the bigger market we could get happened to be from India. And beside that, not only India, even to China. And I want to say that not only in Nigeria, to majority of economic activities now are now being, I don't want to use the term hijacked, but are now being encouraged. People from India and China are now coming in. When you look at, I'm so sorry to use another country as a case study, this is not oil issue, but when you look at development in Ethiopia currently, the rail line being constructed in Addis Ababa actually by Chinese people. When you look at our health sector currently now, majority of doctors that are helping in health sector are from India, bringing much of collaboration with that. So I think that's a little thing I can just say about that. So it's still complicated in terms of where to export your oil to. Sometimes some country will just say that because they want to punish your country, they will say that they lay embargo on the type of product you can send to their country. And as a country that wants to develop, you need to look for alternative. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question to Henri, because that's really eye-opening talk about a place which I know pretty well, actually, or used to know. As a tourist, but also as a historian. Basically, you showed this, you say re-carbonization, that's probably true, but it's largely that was a story of exactly fossil fuel subsidies, a massive exercise of subsidizing this region, just giving money, giving oil, giving gas to it, giving coal, electricity, equipment, and people and capital in exchange for what? So you said it's colonization. Colonization is usually for getting some resources back to the imperial center. So what is this resource over there in Königsberg, in Eastern Prussia now, Kaliningrad? So clearly that's like military position, strategic position, which helps, in this kind of strategic calculus. Okay, but we could also understand that possibly also on the top of the strategic value, that that it's a good place for good position for missiles and airplanes. It's also a control of delivery routes, control of the Baltic Sea, control of this, some major pipelines, they go nearby or around this place. And so that I think this, looking at the transit of oil, gas, and other resources helps to understand the colonial nature of this region.
I think this is on, I believe. Thank you for your question, Alexander. I was feeling massively upstaged by my colleagues, but I think that actually this that presentation of mine had its genesis in a report that we did at my workplace, which was about undersea cables, undersea connections in the Baltic Sea. And what I gathered from it was that Kaliningrad is a great base for destabilization, in which has effectively become a NATO sea. Because without that, Russia is pushed into the easternmost corner of the Gulf of Finland, which is, the most peripheral part of an already peripheral sea. But with Kaliningrad there, it is sort of a foot in the door for effectively a NATO-controlled area, and an area which is seeing massive amounts of construction when it comes to undersea cables. The Baltic states want to disconnect from the Russian electrical grid and connect with the Central European one. All of that entails massive construction of high voltage cables, also telecommunications cables. So yeah, it is a massive asset, and I think that looking at it as a kind of spoiler in the region, which deserves all of that investment because it gives the opportunity to spoil, to destabilize, is perhaps the best course or the best way to look at it.
We can leave the next questions for the reception if you want to keep going on. And I want to invite you to maybe give us a final word, because this is your day. So
well, my day, that was a huge exaggeration. I hope it is really our day, and I'm so grateful to everyone who has come, and sometimes quite afar. And I hope you enjoyed it along with me, and also I'm very, very grateful to Valeria, who really helped to set it up and organize so beautifully. Yeah. And also my very sincere gratitude goes to someone who has not spoken, has not said a word here, but was silently kind of listening. That's Alexander Stokovich, who is the Open Society representative at CEU, and is really the, to say it incorrectly, the godfather of this of this project and this hub. Yeah. That was politically incorrect or criminally incorrect, absolutely. I mean, we've covered so many parts of the world and sectors of life, but not enough. So of course, we are clearly focused on Europe, clearly focused even more so on Eastern Europe. We are living during a major war, which obviously shocks everyone and focuses attention. So understandably, we had this fantastic coverage of Ukraine, two excellent talks. which looked at the situation in a kind of highly unusual perspective, I think very valuable. And also Königsberg or Kaliningrad talk and a whole panel on more general panel on energy relations between Europe and Russia, which also included Ukraine. We had a talk about Nigeria. What I really want to say that we are not aiming at covering everything in this world that's just plainly impossible, but I should acknowledge, just confess that I was trying to find someone who would give us a coherent talk about Iran as a petrostate. Obviously, that's crucial for our contemporary, for our current concerns. And there is a lot of literature about Iran, but basically I failed to find, to bring here someone, you know, who would agree and whom I would trust. I asked Dirk for help. Dirk actually tried to help. So that's all work in progress. So we're aiming at converting this workshop into a collected volume called Decarbonization and the Petrostate. And basically it's now in the plans of the CEU press. And very soon you will receive our emails and then remind us about, you know, the title and the abstract and the first draft and the second draft, etc. And we have like a timetable for that. And so we will be working on it. We will be also working on 2 other volumes. One called War and the Petrostate. And of course, Ukraine will be a big part of it, but not only Ukraine, maybe Iran, by the way, as well. And I say War and the Petrostate, the actual title is War and the Anthropocene. War and the Anthropocene. So that's the title for the second volume, War and the Anthropocene. So that's much larger context than what we were talking about now. And that volume, War and the Anthropocene, we will be co-editing. Dirk Moses and I will be co-editing this. So this fascinating interaction, which is quite new to me, but not so new to Dirk. Interaction between different levels of regulation of life, essentially. Like imagine whatever, farmer's market, very simple economic exchange, and it should be all regulated by prices or whatever, contracts or free will, basically, of their partners. But also there is a participation of the state, like famous scales that would be controlled by the prince. Scales and weights and, you know, the honesty of exchange. But also if something goes really wrong, so economic regulators are not enough. There should be a criminal law that sort of works like an umbrella over that. And I guess that this logic at some point will work for the planetary exchanges. That there is, you know, price mechanisms and laws and regulations, and you know, the prince Leviathan, who is kind of controlling the scales and the weights and, you know, units of measurements, and the criminal law. Like if something goes wrong, and of course that needs some kind of planetary governance under that. So War and the Anthropocene, and we're also planning still another book on the green parties in Europe, comparative politics of green parties. So that's a very big agenda, and we're working with much faith and enthusiasm. And it's really great to feel a full success of this initial event. Now Valeria will tell us something even more joyful.
Well, to the very joyful news, those who owe me tickets and boarding passes, please do so. Don't forget to give them to me before you leave, because it's important for the reimbursement purposes. Unless you do that, we cannot reimburse you. So that's joyful news for you. Those of you who are invited to the speaker dinner, we're going to be getting ready to depart at around 7 p.m., 10 minutes. We are going to slowly move from the reception area to the entrance or exit, for that matter, and we are going to walk all together. With this, I think we are wrapping up our pretty successful day. I thank you all, especially the speakers who made this day happen. I would like to also thank people who came to listen and ask all the wonderful questions that inspired the discussion today. And I would like to especially thank those of you who followed us online, because I know it can be pretty tedious to attend an online event, which is a whole day like this, without the face-to-face interaction. Thank you so much to our wonderful OHPA team. Thank you to Alexander, obviously. Thank you to Sina and Johanna for the moderation and for also your presentation. And thank you so much to our other members of the team who helped organize this. So Konal, Stefan is not here. And, oh no, he's there. Yes. And Mark, thank you. And I wish you a great evening. And now we get to proceed to the real fun part, because we do have wine at the reception.